Vietnam smothered a wave of anti-China protests on Sunday with a massive security clampdown.
You can see Chinese maritime militia vessel already moving to close the opening.
In a sign that tensions in the South China Sea are continuing to hit land, anti-China demonstrators near Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam looted and burned several foreign-owned factories on Tuesday.
Vietnam has just sent a clear message to China. Back off, now. Over the past few years, tensions between these two neighbors have been building. But recent moves show that Vietnam is done playing nice. From buying American F-16 fighter jets to hosting the French president in partnership meetings, Vietnam is stepping up its game. These aren't just random acts. They're part of a bigger push to stand tall against China's growing aggression in the region. For too long, Vietnam has navigated a tricky relationship based on China's terms. But now, it's had enough. In this video, we'll explore just how China's much smaller neighbor is giving it a run for its money, and what that means for Asia, the US, and the rest of the world. Now, let's start with the latest news that's got everyone talking. First off, in September of 2024, Vietnam upgraded its relationship with the US to a comprehensive strategic partnership. This was a big deal, as it's a status that has previously been reserved only for a handful of countries. Following that buildup, in April, reports broke that Vietnam sealed a deal with the United States to buy 24 F-16 fighter jets. This marks the biggest defense agreement between Washington and Hanoi. The jets themselves are the F-16V Viper, which is the most advanced variant of the Fighting Falcon. It is a fighting machine that's equipped with cutting-edge technology. This decision to buy F-16 fighter jets from the US instead of Chinese jets also says a lot about where the country stands in its relationship with China. As you might probably imagine, China is not happy. For years, China has pushed its own fighter jets onto countries in the region, promoting them as powerful and cost-effective. But Vietnam turning to the US instead is a clear message. It doesn't want to deal with China anymore. The CCP spends billions to flood platforms like YouTube with propaganda. Now, we're just a small voice trying to break through their noise. But if you believe people deserve the truth, well then hit that like and subscribe button. It makes a real difference. Okay, let's get back to the video. The F-16s give Vietnam a huge upgrade in power, making its military more capable in conflict. They also bring Vietnam closer to the US, deepening a defense relationship that China would rather see weakened. This erodes not just President Xi's pride, but also his influence. A fun fact is that Vietnam has depended on Russia, China's ally, for arms for several decades. To switch up and now buy from America is also a blow to Russia-Vietnam relations. Because of all this, Beijing is on edge, with Chinese media warning it could stir up trouble. But Vietnam's not blinking. It simply doesn't care. Another big moment of defiance came recently in May, when French President Emmanuel Macron visited Hanoi. He didn't just show up for a photo op. Macron met with Vietnam's top leaders, including Communist Party chief To Lam. He talked up a rules-based order, a not-so-subtle jab at China's habit of ignoring international laws in the South China Sea. France and Vietnam then signed deals to boost cooperation in energy, transport, and defense. Macron's visit wasn't just about business. It was a public nod to Vietnam's growing role in standing up to Chinese regional dominance. France has even upgraded its ties with Vietnam to a comprehensive strategic partnership, making it the first EU country to do so. And speaking of pushing back, let's run through why Vietnam is so fed up with China in the first place. To understand why Vietnam is pushing back so hard, we need to take a brief look at its history. For centuries, Vietnam and China have had a complicated relationship. China's influence has loomed large, from ancient tributes to modern-day border disputes. The South China Sea is the biggest flashpoint. Both countries claim overlapping patches of water and islands. In particular, there are the Paracel and Spratly Islands, which are rich in fish, oil, and strategic value. The Paracel Islands, called the Shisha Islands in China, are a cluster of over 30 islands in the South China Sea, between the coast of Vietnam and the southern coast of China. The Paracels are controlled by China, but also claimed by Vietnam and Taiwan. Back in 1974, China seized the Paracels from Vietnam in a bloody clash. In 1988, they fought again over the Spratlys, leaving dozens of Vietnam sailors dead and China victorious. The memories from that are wounds that still sting, especially since it's unresolved. And as if to add insult to injury, China has been acting like a big bully. China has been making life difficult for Vietnamese fishermen in the South China Sea. And Vietnam is getting fed up. One of the worst incidents happened on September 29, 2024. A Vietnamese fishing boat was surrounded by 2 Chinese ships near the Paracel Islands. Around 40 Chinese personnel boarded the vessel and started beating the fishermen with metal rods. This assault resulted in the fishermen suffering broken bones and having one man unconscious. They also took away 4 tons of fish and all the fishing equipment before letting the boat return to shore. This news caused a massive uproar in Vietnam, since fishermen were in Vietnamese waters. The Vietnamese government immediately protested, demanding compensation and the release of the fishermen. However, China brushed off the accusations, insisting the fishermen were trespassing. China's aggression isn't just limited to harassing fishermen. China has also been expanding its presence in the South China Sea by constructing artificial islands on Vietnam's land. Over the years, China has transformed reefs into fully developed military outposts. This comes complete with airstrips, radar systems, and naval facilities. This controversial project has included the expansion of reefs like Fiery Cross, Mischief, and Subi. These were once small, uninhabited features, but now massive military bases. These islands allow China to project power deeper into the South China Sea. This then gives it control over vital shipping lanes and fishing grounds. Vietnam has responded by accelerating its own island-building efforts. Since November of 2023, Vietnam has added 692 acres of land across 10 features in the Spratly Islands, bringing its total reclaimed land to 2,360 acres. One of Vietnam's largest expansions has been at Bark Canada Reef, which has nearly doubled in size over the past 6 months. The reef now measures 4,318 meters in length, making it capable of hosting a 3,000-meter runway, similar to those found on China's largest outposts. This move is a direct challenge to China's dominance in the region. On top of that, Vietnam is no longer staying quiet about these incidents. Instead of handling disputes behind closed doors, they've started exposing China's actions to the world. They want everyone to see what's happening, making it harder for China to operate unchecked. The more China escalates, the louder Vietnam is getting, and they're making sure the world knows exactly what's going on. The theme here is clear. Vietnam is fed up with China's bullying and is fighting back in every way it can. And speaking of fighting back, one of the areas where Vietnam is fighting back is by hitting China where it hurts the most: the economy. For years, Vietnam leaned heavily on Chinese imports. Everything from electronics to raw materials flowed across the border. In 2024, Vietnam imported $144 billion worth of goods from China, marking a 30.1% increase compared to the previous year. This accounted for 26% of Vietnam's total trade turnover, making China its largest supplier of production inputs. Most of those imports included machinery, electronics, and raw materials, which are essential for Vietnam's manufacturing industries. Combined with exports, the total trade was over $205 billion. And as good as that sounds, this kind of reliance gives China leverage. And Vietnam leaders know dependency is a trap, so they're diversifying. Vietnam has been signing trade deals left and right with countries like the US, the European Union, and Japan. Take the US, for example. In 2024, bilateral trade between Vietnam and the US hit $132 billion, a huge jump from a decade ago. Vietnam is also part of 16 free trade agreements, which gives it access to markets that don't come with China strings attached. Those deals aren't just about money, they're about building economic muscle to stand up to China. Vietnam is effectively building its detachment lines, and there's not a thing that China can do about it. Another smart move is how Vietnam handles tariffs and sanctions. The US has been cracking down on goods that might be made in China but relabeled as Vietnamese to dodge tariffs. Vietnam's playing ball, rushing to prove its exports are legitimate. In May, Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh was working overtime to lock in a trade deal with the US to avoid a hefty 46% tariff threatened by President Donald Trump. By aligning with Western standards and cleaning up its supply chains, Vietnam is showing it can play by global rules that China often bends. This isn't just about avoiding penalties. It's about proving Vietnam can thrive without leaning on Beijing. Then there's the manufacturing shift, and this one's a big deal. Companies are pulling out of China in droves, spooked by rising costs, trade wars, and political risks. And guess what? Vietnam's been ready to catch them. The country has become a magnet for foreign investment. As of March 31st, 2025, the total registered foreign investment into the country reached $10.98 billion. This marks a 34.7% increase compared to the same period in 2024. Vietnam has simply become one of the most attractive options for global manufacturers. As such, there's no shortage of big names that have already invested heavily in the country. Companies are drawn to Vietnam for its low labor costs, improving infrastructure, and growing reputation as a reliable manufacturing hub. Also, for businesses looking for an alternative to China, Vietnam is checking all the right boxes. Take Lego, for instance. The Danish toy company has built a $1.3 billion manufacturing facility in Vietnam's Binh Duong province. And it's not just any factory, it's to be their first carbon-neutral facility globally, powered entirely by renewable energy by 2026. The factory is creating thousands of jobs and solidifying Vietnam's place as a key player in the manufacturing world. This investment is a clear sign that Vietnam isn't just a short-term solution, but that it's being seen as a major long-term partner in global production. Then you've got the tech giants. Samsung, Intel, and LG have all poured significant investments into Vietnam. Samsung in particular has made the country one of its major production bases for everything from smartphones to home appliances. Intel has also invested heavily in its chip assembly and testing facility in Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh City. At the same time, LG has been also focusing on producing electronics and household products in the nation. These companies have played a key role in enhancing Vietnam's reputation as a reliable hub for technology manufacturing. Apple has also been making big moves to shift its manufacturing away from China, and Vietnam is now a major part of that plan. Over the past few years, Apple has been expanding production in Vietnam, making it a key hub for assembling its key products. These include iPads, MacBooks, Apple Watches, HomePods, and AirPods. Instead of relying heavily on China, Apple is spreading its operations, and Vietnam has become a top choice. A big reason for the shift is cost. Manufacturing in Vietnam is cheaper than in China. That means bigger profit margins. Also, the rising political tensions have been affecting supply chains in China, forcing Apple to look for alternatives. Vietnam offers a stable environment, a skilled workforce, and a strong government support for foreign companies. Naturally, this makes it an ideal location for Apple's expansion. Vietnam is also not entirely caught between the US-China trade war, so that makes it a perfect option to replace China. By the end of 2025, Vietnam is expected to handle a large portion of global production for Apple products, including most of its AirPods. Apple isn't just testing the waters with a few factories. It has already moved several key manufacturing units to Vietnam, making the country a central part of its supply network. The company is working with local suppliers and building stronger partnerships to make sure production runs smoothly. While iPhone assembly is still mainly happening in India, Vietnam has quickly become essential for Apple's non-smartphone devices. The apparel industry is another area where Vietnam is thriving. Companies like Nike, Adidas, and H&M have long relied on Vietnam to produce clothing and footwear. With labor costs significantly lower than in China, Vietnam has become a go-to destination for brands looking to benefit from that. And it's not just tech and textiles. Vietnam has even attracted major investments in the furniture sector. Big companies like IKEA and Ashley Furniture are setting up production there to meet growing global demand. High-tech industries are also taking off in Vietnam. Companies like Microsoft are expanding their operations in the country with a focus on electronics and semiconductors. These investments highlight Vietnam's effort to move beyond being a low-cost manufacturing base. The country is making a name for itself in industries that require advanced skill and innovation. This is a big part of why it's so appealing to global businesses right now. All of this paints a clear picture of Vietnam as an increasingly important player in global manufacturing. It's not just about being cheaper than China. It's about being smarter, more flexible, and better equipped for the future. As more companies invest in Vietnam, the country is proving that it has what it takes to eventually knock China off its crown. Putting it all together, this economic shift isn't just good for Vietnam's wallet, it's a direct challenge to China's grip on global supply chains. Every factory that moves to Vietnam is one less under China's thumb, and that's a win for Hanoi. So, now that we've covered economics, let's shift gears to the military side, because this is really where Vietnam's turning heads. The South China Sea is where things get really heated, and Vietnam's not sitting idle. This is also where F-16 purchase deals start to shine. These jets, especially the F-16V models, come with advanced AESA radars and AMRAAM missiles that can strike targets at over 100 miles away. That's perfect for patrolling the South China Sea, where China's been buzzing around with its own J-11s and J-20 jets. The F-16s give Vietnam a way to monitor and, if needed, push back against Chinese planes that get too close to disputed islands. The deal's price tag, which is around $5 billion, shows that Vietnam is willing to spend big to protect its turf. It's also a sign of how far US-Vietnam ties have come. Back in 2016, the US lifted its arms embargo on Vietnam, and since then they've been cozying up with patrol boats, drones, and now fighter jets. This isn't just about hardware, it's about Vietnam picking a side in the region's power struggle. In line with that military mind, Vietnam's also beefing up its defense partnerships, and this is a big part of its strategy. The US is the headliner, but France, Japan, India, and even South Korea are in the mix. During Macron's visit, France also pledged to deepen defense ties, offering everything from training to tech transfers. Japan's also been helping with maritime security, while India's been dangling the possibility of selling BrahMos anti-ship missiles to Vietnam. These partnerships aren't just about gear, they're about sending a message to China that Vietnam's got powerful friends. Friends who are eager to aid and support Vietnam if it comes to that. And among all those friends, the US stands tall. It has been ramping up its military support for Vietnam, especially in recent years. One of the biggest ways it has helped is by supplying Vietnam with refurbished Coast Guard cutters. These ships give Vietnam the ability to patrol its waters more effectively. This is important, as tensions in the South China Sea continue to rise. Vietnam has been pushing back against Chinese territorial claims, so having stronger naval forces makes a big difference. Along with the Coast Guard cutters, the US has also provided Metal Shark patrol boats. These smaller, fast-moving boats help Vietnam guard its coastline and conduct operations where larger ships might not be practical. On top of that, Vietnam has been given T-6 trainer aircraft, which are used to train pilots and improve the country's overall air capabilities. This kind of equipment strengthens Vietnam's defense forces, preparing them for any future challenges. Beyond hardware, the US and Vietnam have been deepening their military relationship through joint training exercises and defense talks. They've held multiple security meetings where they go over strategies, threats, and ways to cooperate more effectively. Vietnam's also hosting international defense expos. This kind of cooperation was unthinkable a decade ago, but now it's a cornerstone of Vietnam's pushback. This back-and-forth exchange helps Vietnam build up its military and improve relations. All in all, Vietnam is baring its fangs to China, showing it that it doesn't need or fear the Asian giant anymore. Additionally, Vietnam is investing in serious military upgrades outside of the jets. They're stocking up on anti-aircraft systems, radars, and artillery to fortify their bases. In 2024, Vietnam bought Israeli-made Spider air defense systems. They also got the Dutch-built Sigma-class corvettes, adding teeth to their navy. They're also training with American and South Korean forces to get their troops up to speed on modern tactics. This isn't about starting a fight. It's about deterrence. Vietnam knows it can't match China's massive military, which boasts hundreds of advanced jets and a navy that dwarfs the region. But by building a credible defense, Vietnam is making it clear that any move by China will come at a cost. Impressive, right? Vietnam's military moves are a big deal, but they're not the only way the country's standing up to China. Vietnam is also playing a clever game with politics and diplomacy, finding ways to push back without fighting. This is where Vietnam's leaders show they're thinking ahead, making friends and speaking out in ways that makes China nervous. It's like moving from a battlefield to a meeting room, and Vietnam's actions here are just as strong. One big way Vietnam is fighting back is through ASEAN, a group of 10 countries in Southeast Asia. Vietnam wants to be a leader in this group, not just sit quietly. In 2024, Vietnam hosted a huge ASEAN meeting in Hanoi. Leaders from all over the region came to talk about trade, safety, and China's growing power. The South China Sea was a major topic. Vietnam spoke about China's bad behavior, like sending ships to scare fishing boats or claiming waters that just don't belong to them. Vietnam isn't just talking for itself. It's getting countries like the Philippines and Malaysia, who've also had problems with China, to join in. By leading in ASEAN, Vietnam is showing China it can't boss everyone around. This isn't just about meetings. Vietnam is pushing ASEAN to make rules for the South China Sea to keep things calm. China doesn't like this idea and keeps delaying, wanting to do whatever it wants. But Vietnam keeps trying. At the 2024 meeting, Vietnam's Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh said these rules need to be strong, so China has to follow them or look bad to the world. This puts China in a hard spot. If it agrees to the rules, it loses more control. If it doesn't, other countries will see China as a troublemaker. Vietnam is using ASEAN like a loudspeaker to make sure China listens. Vietnam's leaders are also getting braver about speaking out. In May, Communist Party leader To Lam gave a speech at the United Nations. He said countries need to follow international laws, like a 2016 court ruling that said China's claims to most of the South China Sea aren't legal. That ruling helped the Philippines, but Vietnam uses it too, saying China's actions are wrong and risky. And these speeches aren't just talk. They're a way to get other countries to support Vietnam and pressure China to stop. It's a bold move because China doesn't like being criticized. But Vietnam is beyond the point of caring and coddling China anymore. Vietnam is also fighting China with legal steps. In 2023, Vietnam sent a report to the United Nations, explaining why it has the rights to parts of the South China Sea. The report used history and maps to show Vietnam's claims are real, unlike China's 9-dash line that claims almost the whole sea. But by doing this, Vietnam isn't just arguing with China. It's asking the world, including countries like the US and Japan, to back it up. This legal fight is slow, but it makes China look like it's breaking the rules. What's truly impressive is how Vietnam is trying all these diplomatic moves together. It's not just one meeting or one speech. It's a plan to make China think twice. Every action Vietnam takes makes it harder for China to act without getting in trouble. If China pushes too hard, it could upset ASEAN, lose respect at the UN, or even start a bigger fight with Vietnam's allies. This is smart diplomacy, and Vietnam is showing it's not afraid to use it. Now, let's look at what's happening inside Vietnam, because this fight isn't just about the government. The Vietnamese people are getting excited, and it's changing the way the country feels. There's a lot of pride in being Vietnamese right now, and much of it is aimed at standing up to China. People have been upset with China before, like in 2014, when China put an oil rig in Vietnam's waters and caused protests. But in 2025, this feeling is stronger. On social media, people are calling for boycotts of Chinese products. And this isn't just talk, it's a real change in how people think. The media is helping a lot. Vietnamese newspapers and TV shows are telling stories about China's actions. Things like blocking fishing boats or building bases on reefs that Vietnam claims are being exposed. In 2024, a government TV channel showed a film about the 1988 Spratly Islands fight, where Chinese forces killed 64 Vietnamese sailors. Millions watched that, and it made people angry. These stories aren't just news. They're making people see China as a threat to Vietnam's way of life. The government seems okay with this. Even though it controls the media tightly, it lets these anti-China stories spread, which shows it wants people to feel this way. This pride is showing up on the streets, too. In 2024, thousands of people marched in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi with signs saying things like, "China, stay out of our waters," and "Vietnam stands strong." These protests aren't just about the sea. They're also about money issues, like Chinese companies taking business from Vietnamese ones. The government usually stops protests quickly, but it's been softer on these, letting people express their anger. In May of this year, a big rally in Da Nang had over 5,000 people after a Chinese ship was seen near Vietnam's oil rigs. For the entire population of Vietnam, these China issues are personal. Fishermen can't work in waters their families have fished for years because China's ships scare them away. People see Chinese goods in stores, making it harder for Vietnamese businesses to grow. Everyone knows about the South China Sea, where China is building bases on reefs that Vietnam says are theirs. This isn't just about politics. It's about who Vietnamese people are. They feel like their country's being bullied, and they want to fight back, whether it's marching, boycotting, or supporting their leaders. This people power connects to the bigger story. The government's moves in diplomacy and the military are stronger because the people support them. When leaders like To Lam speak out at the UN, they know the public agrees. When the Navy builds a new runway in the Spratlys, fishermen and students cheer. This unity makes Vietnam's fight. Vietnam's fight against China's influence isn't just about military bases or damaged reefs. It's also about looking ahead, finding new ways to grow stronger and stand tall. The country is making big changes in technology and energy, building a future where it doesn't need to lean on China. These steps are a big part of the same push that we've been talking about. A push to show China that Vietnam is ready to protect its interests and thrive on its own terms. One area where Vietnam is making waves is technology. For years, China has been a major supplier of tech products like phones, computers, and parts for electronics. In 2023, Vietnam imported $40 billion worth of tech goods from China, a huge chunk of its total imports. But Vietnam's leaders know relying on China for technology is risky. If China wanted to, it could cut off supplies or jack up prices, leaving Vietnam in a tough spot. So Vietnam is working hard to build its own tech industry. The government has even launched a plan to boost local tech companies. It has been offering money and training to businesses that make products like chips and software. This is just another step that Vietnam is taking so that it can do without China. This tech push ties back to the economic fight we've been talking about earlier. By building its own tech industry, Vietnam is reducing its need for Chinese imports. At the same time, it's attracting companies that want to move away from China. It's also creating a new kind of power. If Vietnam can make its own chips or software, it's not just saving money, it's gaining control over its future. Chinese tech giants like Huawei have used their products to gain influence in other countries, sometimes even spying. Vietnam's not taking that chance. By going its own way, it's sending a message to China that it can't be controlled. Another big step is energy. Vietnam needs a lot of energy to keep its factories running and its cities growing. For years, it relied on coal and gas, much of it imported from China or mined in ways that hurt the environment. In 2023, China supplied 25% of Vietnam's coal, worth $2 billion. But coal is dirty, and relying on China for it gives Beijing leverage. So Vietnam is turning to cleaner energy, like solar and wind power, to break free. In 2024, Vietnam built 10 new solar farms, producing enough electricity to power 1 million homes. Wind farms are popping up too, especially along the coast, where strong breezes make them work well. These energy projects aren't just about going green, they're about standing up to China. By generating its own power, Vietnam doesn't need to buy as much from China or deal with Beijing's demands. The US and Europe are helping too. These partnerships show how Vietnam is building a network of allies to support its goals. China, meanwhile, is still pushing coal and dirty power plants in other countries, which makes it look out of step with the world. Vietnam's energy shift is a way to say it's choosing a better path. This focus on technology and energy shows how Vietnam is thinking long-term. It's not enough to buy fighter jets or build islands. Vietnam wants to be strong in every way. By growing its tech industry and clean energy, it's creating a future where Chinese influence is smaller. These changes take time, but they're already making a difference, and they're part of a bigger story of a country that's had enough of being pushed around. The numbers tell an interesting story too. In 2024, Vietnam's economy grew by 7%, one of the fastest rates in Asia, beating out China's 5%. Vietnam's military budget hit $7 billion, a 10% jump from the year before, showing it's serious about defense. Trade with the US and the EU grew to $200 billion combined, while trade with China, though still big at $150 billion, is growing more slowly. These figures show Vietnam is pulling away from China's orbit, bit by bit. Every dollar spent on American jets or European solar panels is a dollar China doesn't control. So now, with all that said, how is China reacting to everything, seeing as Vietnam's message is so loud and clear? Well, China's not taking this lying down, of course. Beijing's being quiet about some of Vietnam's moves, like the island building, but it's watching closely. In 2025, Chinese ships stepped up patrols in the South China Sea, sometimes getting close to Vietnam's oil rigs or fishing boats. These aren't random, they're warnings. China's also been cozying up to other ASEAN countries like Cambodia and Laos, trying to keep them on its side. In 2024, China gave Cambodia $200 million for a new national stadium in Cambodia, in a clear move to buy influence. But Vietnam's not backing off. Its leaders know China's tactics: offer money, make threats, claim everything, and they're ready to counter them. Standing up to China isn't easy though, and there are risks. China's military is huge, with 2 million soldiers and 500 fighter jets, compared to Vietnam's 400,000 troops and 60 jets. If things got heated, Vietnam would need its allies to step in. And in a world of ever-shifting alliances, that's not really guaranteed. Economically, China's still a giant, and cutting ties too fast could hurt Vietnamese businesses that rely on Chinese supplies. The environmental damage from island building is another worry. If Vietnam's reefs keep dying, it could hurt fishermen and tourism, which brought in $30 billion in 2024. These challenges are real, but Vietnam's leaders seem to think the bigger risk is doing nothing and letting China take over. Looking at the big picture, Vietnam's strategy is about balance. It's not trying to start a war or cut China out completely, that would be too dangerous. Instead, it's carving out a space to be its own country, free from China's shadow. Vietnam says that it wants to be a partner to the world, not a pawn in China's game. This is a story about a country deciding it's had enough and it's taking control of its future. The F-16 jets roaring over the South China Sea, the trade deals signed with the US, and the crowds marching in Hanoi are all part of the same story. Vietnam's not just reacting to China, it's building a stronger, prouder nation that can stand on its own. The road ahead won't be easy. China's not going anywhere, and its power is still massive. But Vietnam's shown it's got the heart and the smarts to keep pushing forward. This fight matters because it's not just Vietnam's fight. Other countries in the region, like the Philippines and Indonesia, are watching closely. If Vietnam can stand up to China and win, it gives them all hope that they can too. The US, Japan, and Europe are watching as well, seeing Vietnam as a partner in keeping the region free and fair. Even the fishermen on their boats, the students in their classrooms, and the workers in the factories are part of this. They're all saying the same thing. Vietnam has had enough, and it's not backing down.